We took a break. Welcome back. We're going to talk about spiritual care and chaplaincy. This is an important topic because it's a central theme. It's why you're here. This is the main show in town. And I'd like to talk to you about this in 4 major bullets. The first is I'd like to present to you our conception of society as a support system. Then I will talk to you about how the Hindu society, which is a self-organizing society, when it moves west, it creates a vacuum that needs to be fulfilled. Third, I'd like to present to you a novel way to think about the passage of life, a storyline for the field of view for spiritual care, which presents a framework to think about the entirety of life, from before conception all the way to long after death. And then fourthly, the fourth idea we're going to talk about is a vision for scalable continuum of care for spiritual care. Now that sounds like a mouthful, but it's going to be a lot of fun when we get to it. There are 4 major topics in this particular lecture. Every one of these are novel ideas that we've been developing at HCI. So you're going to have to pay attention and listen with an attitude of critiquing as well as accepting. So don't take anything lying down. If you don't agree with it, absolutely feel free to challenge us on it. And if you agree with it, ask why you agree with it. All right. First, to think about what is the true function of society? What is the nature of society that we live in? Why do we not all live alone like hermits? Why do we humans live in a social support system? All right. In order to explain this, we could go back in time to look at the evolution of humans out of primates. But instead, I'm going to take you on a travel that is not in time, but in distance. I'm going to take you to the surface of Mars. All right. Now you're on the surface of Mars, and the Sanskrit and Hindi word for Mars is Mangal. Mangal also means auspicious, but not all is Mangal on the surface of Mars, because if you were to find yourself in Elon Musk's rocket and transport it to Mars, you're going to find a harsh and unlivable climate. Why? Because here's what's going on. There is low atmosphere, and therefore there is a high temperature range. 1 second. Okay. All right. There is a high temperature range within the day, not just summer and winter, but within the day, you're seeing that the temperature goes from -20 to -80 Celsius in one day. It goes down and lower all the time. It's a very harsh and unlivable climate. And so that's the problem that you face with being on Mars, which is the reason life on Earth is a far more comfortable life. Why? Because you look at the band of temperatures on Earth, and it turns out it's a very narrow, comfortable band of temperature. That's the purpose of the atmospheric layer around the planet. And that is how I'd like you to think about what is the function of a good, well-run society. A good, well-run society functions as air conditioning for the spiritual self, to insulate the emotional states of its members. You're too happy, you won $1 billion lottery. Well, you can throw a party, you call your friends, share your happiness. You lose your $1 billion in a bet in Las Vegas, you're sad. Well, your friends call you into their houses, you stay there, and then you share your sorrow, and then everything's fine in a couple of days. Whether it's happiness or sadness, it doesn't last forever. And it's not off the charts, unhappiness and sadness. You're not ricocheting madly. And that's the function of a well-regulated society. A well-run society insulates the emotional states of its members, providing us all a comfortable state of being in. That definition we can trace all the way back, not to the Bhagavad Gita, but close enough to elsewhere in the Mahabharata. Same two the people, which is Sri Krishna himself is talking to Arjuna, same two people as the Bhagavad Gita, but a few days later in Karna Parva, And Sri Krishna is describing the function of a society to Arjun. The context is interesting, but I'm not going to get into that story here. You might hear from me on this in future lectures. But dharayati, dharmo dharayati praja. That's the core part over here, which is dharma sustains the society. Dharna, I mean, to hold together, to glue together society, to ensure the maintenance of social order and the well-being and progress of humanity. And so holding society together, see, the samyukta, that is the word being used over here, right? So dharma is that which brings the society together, ensures the well-being and progress, and sustains the society. This glue that binds us together is dharma. That's the definition that we're using. And this glue is coming apart in modern society. And so what we're doing here, and I'm going to talk to you about when we get to spiritual care, we feel that the spiritual atmosphere around our planet, so to speak, is coming apart. The dharma is coming apart. And therefore, societies are worse, not just because they're poorly cohered, poorly glued together, but also because they provide poor climates for us to live in. We cannot thrive as human beings without this connection that we have to each other and without the regulation of our emotional states. And that's why we're looking at spiritual care. So let's look a little bit more at the idea of spiritual care itself. But for that, I'd like to tell you that as the Hindu tradition moves west, people from the East, you look at Indian society or Chinese or Japanese societies, are functionally very different from Western societies, even though on the outside we might look the same fancy buildings and roads and so on. But the structure of society is very different. How the society is organized is very different. And underlying this is the underlying religious framework that societies have been built on. The Western society is built on a Judeo-Christian model. So the Jewish people, the Christian people, the Islamic people, that's the Judeo-Christian framework. And it's broadly similar. You can think of a day of the weekend. You think about Friday, Saturday, Sunday. People get together, whether it's at the mosque, at the temple, or at the church. They get together. And in this community bubble, people don't go to all the churches they can visit around their neighborhood. No, people tended to belong to a specific church, which wasn't just the church they went to pray in. This was where they belonged. This was a community bubble that they belonged to. And inside this community bubble, you had a one-stop shop for all your needs. You needed to be ministered to. You need to talk to someone confidentially, or you need to offer prayers to God, or you need to hear the gospel. You want to hear a sermon and what it means. All of those needs that people have are serviced all under one roof on one day of the week, right? And that's the underlying framework on which the Judeo-Christian society has been built. It's a very closely organized. And when you see critique about religion, when people say, "Oh no, I hate religion," or I'm atheistic, or whatever, is usually this model that people are revolting against. As I'll show you, this revolt is quite mainstream, and in fact, it's a very dominant trend in Western society. Next session, when we meet, I'm going to talk to you about it. But today, I'm just going to tell you that this framework is coming apart at its seams in the Western society. But this is still the dominant framework on which the Western society is built. You belong to a church or a temple or a stake or whatever it is that it's called. And that's your people. That's who you know. That's who your social network is. Now, in this context are placed people from a different kind of social order, which is the Indian or Hindu framework. And the Hindu framework is very different. Hinduism is not an organized religion of the Western variety or the Judeo-Christian variety. We are a self-organizing principle or religion or tradition. Now, the way the Hindu society services spiritual needs is quite different. You do not go to a temple and ask for a sermon, because there's no one giving sermons at the temple. You go to a Shastra Ved, or someone who can give a talk on what the Vedanta says, or what what the scriptures are saying, or someone, you might even do a Bhagavad Puran satram, and then in there someone might tell you the Puran and then tell you what the meaning is and bring it home. Different people doing different things. You might go to a guru who might listen to you and give you spiritual advice. And many times for confidential conversations, we go to our friendly neighborhood uncle, auntie, astrologer, and tell them our deepest problems and expect to hear answers. I'm not getting here into the merits of astrology or not, but these conversations serve as a way of a pressure release. You have something to say about the confidential situation that you find yourself in, and there's someone to talk to. And as for the community bubble, well, think of it as a Kularnava, as a community ocean, a whole Indian Ocean filled of people. You belong anywhere you go. So the sense of community is not limited to a day of the week or to a physical location, but essentially you're swimming in an ocean of community. That's the framework in which Hinduism has generally thrived. Now we run into a problem when East meets West. And that's the problem that we're going to address for the Hindu diaspora, because essentially all of these things begin to come apart. The community ocean that we used to live in the air that you breathe, there is Hinduism. And again, in a later talk, I will talk to you about it. There was a Pew Research study in India that said even the Christian and Islamic people in India broadly believe in the idea of karma and in the idea of reincarnation, which, if you understood their religion, it makes no sense. Because if you believed in reincarnation, then why would you care so much about infinite heaven or hell? And also, if you believe in karma, then what of your jealous and angry God? What is he going to do if karma, the system of karma, maintains itself? But in India, because it's in the air that you breathe, everyone understands what these ideas are and everyone believes it. But what happens when you place in a geography outside India? You're in the Middle East, you're in Australia, you're in India, South Africa, wherever you are. The air that you breathe does not carry this information. It does not exist in the conversations that you have casually. It does not exist in pop culture. It does not get reminded to you in festivals and art and so on. And in that context, this protective community ocean is gone. And these sources of wisdom and these sources of confidential conversations are also gone. And so everything begins to come apart at the seams when a system such as the Hindu tradition is placed abroad. And that's the problem that the diaspora faces. But we're not the only people facing a problem. Another community that's facing this problem happens to be everyone, all of us here in the Western world. Essentially, we're facing a breakdown of society. There's a loneliness epidemic that's persisting. This is US data, but in other countries as well, the same research bears out that there is a palpable existence of loneliness across age bands. And this isn't just something you feel in the heart. This is something you feel in your body because it takes a toll. It disrupts your sleep. It disrupts your weight pattern. It disrupts, it increases substance abuse and a whole bunch of other problems. Essentially, loneliness is a very dangerous and debilitating disease, which is a direct result of the Western society, which, like I said a couple of slides ago, that model is coming apart at its seams. So there is a problem both ways. The Hindus that are outside do not have the ecosystem that used to propagate Hinduism, and people in the West are having a problem of the same type, which is the social fabric is coming apart, and there's nothing that can be done about it. You can certainly not expect to undo the religious declines. Again, next session I will talk about it. You cannot, because it's a much bigger trend running into decades, but you can do something to fulfill those gaps. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Let's talk about spiritual care. Where spiritual care and chaplaincy meet is really this. Think of this, what we are in today, as the age of DIY spirituality. Even the most devout people in whatever tradition tend to now have a more DIY spirituality. Why? Because we've unbundled everything. We go to different people. We go to gurus, astrologers, therapists, life coaches to have these confidential conversations and just have someone to talk to and who listen to our problems without judgment. There is now where the sacred rituals of religious types are being replaced by non-sacred but personal rituals. There have been a number of habit books that have been selling in the West now running into millions every year. Self-help is a massive category, and you'll see that personal rituals are a big part of the spend now in the West. They're replacing sacred rituals, but they're rituals nonetheless. And very little room for social community building, except maybe online. And then instead of going to to someone for a sermon, that is replaced by just watching things on YouTube, just listening to podcasts and YouTube talks and so on and so forth. All of that replaces the sermons that you were probably getting on the Sunday church schedule. And that leaves a yawning gap for these private, confidential conversations where you could just be heard by someone who's compassionate, someone who's there to listen to you, not to judge you, but to help you think about your problems and give you perspective. And so that's where spiritual care and chaplaincy fit into the whole thing, which is restoring this sense of community. You see, we're placing the circle right on the community circle because this restores our belief in humanity. This restores our connection to each other as humans. And this new emerging model of DIY spirituality mixes the best of both worlds. From the organized religion, it takes the idea of chaplaincy. Again, I'll talk about it next week, but it takes the idea of chaplaincy and the processes and the rigor applied to it, and applies it and makes it available in a very DIY format. And it takes the best of the Hindu tradition, which is self-organized, and you see it's still available. We can make all of the tradition available through these means. And that brings us to HCI's vision for spiritual care. This is how we think about spiritual care being organized in the future. All right, so that's part 2 of my talk. Now let's get to part 3. All right, let's get to part 3. I'm going to talk to you about passage of life and a storyline for the field of view. Now, the field of view is, again, content we've created at HCI, and it's, we've developed it, we're developing it, but it represents, and so it's a very pivotal diagram. You're going to see it in all, almost all the contexts, but we built this to really begin with Silicon Valley people. So we said, okay, what are the problems that society has? Let's solve the problems that exist. And to understand that, we diagrammed it. And that diagram is this passage of life, field of view. All right, let's begin the story. The story begins in an apartment. What kind of apartment? Well, any apartment. Essentially, an apartment is a place where we live apart from everybody else. It turns out an apartment just isn't the square footage in your flat. Apartment is a state of life. We all seem to be living apart individually, without support, and without sharing. It's a life lived in this loneliness band from beginning to end in a just bubble of yourself. This is no way to live. And we looked at in the section I talked about the Mars atmospheric layer. This is no way to live because it has very clear health impact. And of course, the society that comes out of this loneliness is an unhappy and not so good society. Now, the idealized and ideal modern life tends to have a lot of events going through life. Now, outside of this event of loneliness, there's career choices that you're making, parenting, disputes, health issues, personal aspirations and productivity and the meaning of life, bereavement, regrets that we nurture and nurse later in life, and then seeking out for spiritual advancement, as well as thinking about our estate and inheritance and our health and so on. This entire full spectrum of life with support. If we had support, we'd be talking to friends about it, and they'd be available for that. So ideally, we would like to lead our life in concert with our community, and then have people to share these life events with. All right. Now, in the Hindu tradition, we don't just mark the passage of time on the calendar. We mark the passage of time on life as well. So we look at the passage of time with the sun, the moon, the stars, and the life itself. And all of this involves celebrations, traditions, festivals, and samskaras. Samskaras are rites of passage. We look at all of these, and almost all of these are excuses for getting together with family and sharing. These are just ways of coming together and celebrating the sun crossing over to some other side, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's the rich Hindu tradition, very colorful, very joyous, very festive, and includes, from before birth, when people get married, the wife is blessed so that she may bear children, and so from that to the pre-birth celebrations, all the way to death and beyond, long after death, we look out for our ancestors and we think about them many generations out, hoping for their welfare and praying for their welfare and so on. There are rituals that go all the way through. Not just that, we look at life itself through the stages of life. Welcome back, Kailashi. We look at life through the stages. We look at life in 4 stages. Brahmacharya, the age of youth, when where our objective is to conserve our energy and acquire a lot of knowledge and wisdom. The Grihastha, the married life, where our objective is to raise family and raise children and to earn a lot of money so we can donate. And then eventually to Vanaprastha, which is heading to the hills, essentially beginning to withdraw from the world and withdraw from worldly duties. And then finally to sannyasa, when you let go of all earthly connections and are only focused on personal spiritual growth. That entire spectrum of life is recognized and celebrated in the Hindu tradition. So we mix these two together. The previous slide was essentially the vast spectrum of life. This slide is all those celebrations. You juxtapose these together, and this is what you get. You get the full spectrum of life. And don't you wish you had someone to share these with? That's exactly the point of view that a good community should have, which is you now need a community to support and share through all these celebrations, all these disputes, all these issues of parenting, grieving, productivity, estate planning, health planning, regrets and bereavement. There's so much going on that wouldn't you wish you had the community with you? And how community? Your family, your immediate family, your friends, and your extended network of people, not just people on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook who can like and subscribe, but people that you can talk to, people that you can connect with, people that you can have deep and engaging conversations with. Those are the needs of the community, coming together, pulsating through festivals, through life events, through conversations, all the way through. This is a rich and meaningful life in a rich and well-functioning society. But sadly, we are not there. That is not the society we live in, but that is the society we wish to live in. And that's the job that you have signed up for. You are right here. You have placed yourself right here in the band, right outside the friends and family, as part of the friends and extended network. As a counselor of Hindu tradition or as a Hindu chaplain, you're offering spiritual support just as an extended member of the family, available to everyone in the community, Hindu or not, it doesn't matter, available to everyone for conversations on this entire wide range of topics. Now, this seems like a tall order, is it not? This seems like you didn't sign up for this. This is not something that you're probably prepared for. And if you feel prepared for it, well, trust me, you're not. None of us are prepared for it. But that's what HCI's training is designed for. That's what we're trying to build for. So as we've designed the course and the curriculum, here's what's going on. We are essentially taking each of these block items, career options or health planning or death or celebration, samskaras. All of these are lectures that we bring in practitioner faculty, and their job is to teach these topics from the perspective of a practitioner and help you understand the sort of challenges that people are facing. What are the problems they're facing? What does the tradition say? What does an expert therapist do or a counselor do? Again, we're not teaching you to become therapists. This training is not enough for that. We're not teaching you to be all-round counselors to intervene in everyone's, to poke our noses into other people's lives. That's not the point. We can't teach that in the amount of time we have together. But as a counselor of Hindu tradition, you'll get to understand people's lives. You get to understand what the tradition says in some of these topics. And then as you continue to stay engaged with the Sangha, your knowledge and our collective knowledge will gain, and we'll be here to support each other. And that's what I'm going to cover in the fourth part. But here you are doing this course, and at the end of the course, you're sitting there alone. You've done your course, you've got your business card. By the way, we do make an introductory card, and as a part of our gift for your graduation, you'll get that. But what next? You get a gift card, it has your name, it says you're a counselor of Hindu tradition, and then what? How are you going to offer your very kind and helpful services to the community? You need a system to take care of that. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. I'm going to talk to you about our vision for spiritual care. So the thing is this, you're going to be sitting here with your business card alone. We don't want you to be alone. There's a whole ecosystem that you will belong to. And then we'd like you to understand what that ecosystem is right now. All right. So that ecosystem is what we call a vision for scalable continuum of care for spiritual care. Now, this is a mouthful, and I'm going to ask you as an assignment to say this a few times until your tongue rolls over and refuses to participate in this nonsense, which is a vision for scalable continuum of care for spiritual care. Now, let me parse this and break it down so it becomes easier to understand. It's a vision, so that part we understand. Scalable means it's not just you and me alone. We are together, and we're able to address more and as many people as we can using the benefits of technology. Remember those days when we used to have the neighborhood yellow cab guy and you would have to call them? Now you call an Uber and any number, infinite number of cars are available. The same thought can be applied to spiritual care, and that's the scalable part. When we say continuum of care, I'll show you in the next few slides. What we're saying is you can work as a volunteer, and if you like it and you want to do that for the rest of your life, you can train as a professional. So there's a continuum of care from volunteers to professionals that you're now going to be participating in toward spiritual care. So now I hope I've broken this sentence down enough so that you understand it's not just a cheeky mouthful. It actually makes sense. So let's begin all the way at home. Who needs spiritual care? And so remember the homework assignment at the beginning of lecture one that Kailashi showed you. Now you're going to begin to see the pieces fill out. We have a 6-box model, and we're going to show you that in the next few slides. The question is, who needs spiritual care? Well, people need spiritual care at home. Individuals might need spiritual care. Families might need spiritual care. But you might be a student at a college, an employee at a hospital, or a patient at a hospital, or someone who's imprisoned. Everyone needs spiritual care because everyone goes through highs and lows, and in institutional settings as well. But in institutional settings, there are often jobs, chaplain jobs in the army, in hospitals, in colleges and universities. Now there are formal chaplain jobs that are available where you can actually help people with their needs as an employed person in that institutional setting, whether it's a hospital, prison, senior home, university, or school. All right. Now you're sitting there and you're available there as a provider. Is that enough? Is that enough to do your certificate, do your chaplaincy, and you're off to the races, right? Well, it could be enough if we had enough people, but that's not really enough because there's a vast spectrum of problems people face, and the Hindu tradition and the collective wisdom of hundreds or thousands of generations is too much for us to each individually acquire. There's a lot of knowledge that can be acquired, right? So it's not enough to just have people trained and available. This model will only be scalable if we have a way of pooling the expertise together. If we have a way to access experts and have them available to you. And so what Hindu Community Institute is doing is actually we create a roster of people that are experts in Hindu tradition or last rites or temple priests, physicians, chaplains, counselors, subject matter experts that are in the community and available to solve as second, third level of expertise. So, if you don't need to pretend to be an expert in everything, so long as you have the ability to understand a problem and connect with the people and give them a compassionate presence, you will, at the back of you, have access to supporting experts. But is that enough? It is not enough. Why is it not enough? Because oftentimes it's just a question of knowing what to do. And knowing what to do should not have to be reinvented with every expert. And that's why HCI Sangha comes together to create authenticated knowledge assets. We've been working on authenticated knowledge assets, and you see them through this course on a wide range of things, from guides to family life, guides to marriage, including interfaith marriage. We have a very interesting session on that. Guides to last rites. We are creating authenticated knowledge assets. And one of my favorite topics is the guide to quality of life. That's going to be a fun thing for you to work on, because we're trying to answer that perennial question, how do you do? How are you doing? And the answer to that is, I'm fine, thank you. No, the answer is not, I'm fine, thank you. We just don't have the language in the West to answer that question. How am I doing? And so quality of life, again, is something that we think deeply about. We're creating authenticated knowledge assets for some of all of these things. Are these enough? And the answer is not. It is not enough for the simple reason that people need to be able to find you. You need to be able to manage your information. We need to be able to learn from the cases. We need to be able to have case management processes, because it's not enough to do a DIY counselor work. You can't just be a standalone counselor. There are methods and ways of doing this that are proven to be effective, protocols that are safe for you and the person that is being served, and it's important for case management. And so service infrastructure must be set up, which is what HCI is doing. And finally, is that enough? And naturally, you can see there's a hole over here, and naturally, it's not enough. So let me fill that box out. What is that box? That is all the money, all the governance and funding. It turns out you need money, you need insurance, because it turns out in the West, we live in litigious societies. You give someone helpful advice, and they sue you right back because no good deed is left unpunished. So you need to have insurance. Can you carry insurance as an individual? Sure. but it's expensive. So HCI is figuring out ways that we can create this insurance. We're creating funding. So for chaplaincy, for example, we have funding to part pay for your chaplaincy tuition. Again, all of these are things that are needed institutionally. So let's put everything together. This is HCI's 6 parks model. Now, so therefore, you know that when you're going out into the field, you're not going alone. You have the full strength of the community available to you. And so this is the full framework that and the context in which you will find yourself as you go into the community. At this point, I'm going to pause again and let you stare at the slide. And then Kailash, I'd like to see if you want to jump. Okay.
Thank you again. Very, very informative.
Kailash, your audio is a little muffled, so you might want to adjust your mic a little.
I think my computer went off for some reason. Still, is it okay or?
Much better. This is much better. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to point out to the class that remember in the beginning, we said we would like to have for the first session a lightweight homework. And that is basically this elemental chart, these 6 elements. First one, element number 1 is who needs spiritual care or who would you serve. Second element is the provider, you, in what capacity are you serving. And then the 4th element, support, the 3, 4, 5, 6 are the 4 elements of support that you need. One is the expertise, one is knowledge assets, infrastructure, and governance. So what we want to do is make sure that you're thinking through in drafting your own roadmap and the homework. What would be for you when you live, for your circumstances, what would be a good place to serve? And how would you, what capacity? And then what do you think you're going to need, in terms of some support, some expertise, some infrastructure, basic and coverage and the protection of your liability and all that stuff. HCI has all those elements to bring to you. So I just want to make sure that we just emphasize that point one more time and make your homework more interesting and more insightful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kailash. All right. So now we've covered lectures 1 and 2. We've talked about the needs of the future generations of the Hindu diaspora, as well as the existence of spiritual care and chaplaincy. Next week, when we meet, we're going to have a lot of fun talking at length about spiritual care and chaplaincy with a very fascinating panel discussion that we have.